Landscape of the U.S. media. I'm joined from California by Cenk Uygur, founder and host of the online news show The Young Turks. And joining me on set is journalism professor and retired White House correspondent Richard Benedetto. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Richard, big news organizations, the big traditional news organizations, often referred to as the mainstream media, have been cutting back on the numbers of people they employ, have been cutting back on the amount of money they spend. There's been massive consolidation, takeovers by the corporations, etc. What has this done to Americans' access to good quality news?
Well, the jury is still out as to what it's done to the quality. There are some people who say the quality has really gone down as a result of this. Some people say the quality is even better because there's more immediacy, we are faster with the news, we have more sources to tap into with social media and so forth. The jury's still out, but the thing that I notice quickly is that there's still a lack of good, solid, investigative and explanatory reporting that once was done primarily by the print organizations. That's not being done as extensively as it once was.
Okay, let's go to Cenk. Cenk, there are very few independent news outlets left right now. Most of them belong to huge corporations. As I said, there's been these huge corporate takeovers. And in a number of these corporations, they just see this as a revenue stream. You know, if a big network belongs to a big entertainment corporation, it's just another revenue stream, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, it actually didn't start that way on television. It was supposed to be a public service, the news was. And the different networks that got to broadcast over the public airwaves in America, in return, had to do the public service of news. News wasn't supposed to be an entertainment center that brought in as much profit as anyone else. Well, that was quickly forgotten, and instead it's been replaced by what we have now, which I think is, on television at least, close to terrible. I mean, when's the last time CNN said the Pentagon lied to you about that? Almost never, because they don't, I mean, even if they had a huge investigative team, which they don't, what would they use it for? They wouldn't use it to investigate the government. That's the last thing they want to find out, is that the government is doing something wrong. They're largely in bed with the government. So MSNBC does propaganda for the Democratic Party, honestly, and unfortunately. Fox News here does propaganda for the Republican Party. Everybody's aware of that. And CNN largely does propaganda for both. So we're in a miserable state of affairs when it comes to the media in the U.S.
What do you make of that, Richard? Even if big news organizations had investigative teams, they're not going to really unearth much. Well, they don't want to upset the powers that be.
Well, you know, there's a different tradition, I think, that's sort of seeping into the journalism profession today. We were taught when I was coming up in the business, and primarily in the print business, that, you know, you were a representative of the people, not of any political party, not of any ideology, not of any government. You were there to represent the people and give them the information that the government had that wasn't being told them. I don't know if people who approach the business today have that same feeling. So that I think that the older folks like myself who came up with that tradition find it a little frustrating that for example, a story such as the IRS looking into conservative organizations, that would be a story that in the old days of the old media would have print journalists all over it. But it's not happening now.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that in a couple of ways. So, great story told by Sam Donaldson on The Young Turks, our program, a long time ago when we were just on the radio. He said that Roone Arledge, who's boss at ABC News, back when Donaldson was the White House correspondent for ABC News under Reagan and Clinton, anytime the Reagan administration or the Clinton administration called to complain about Sam Donaldson, Roone Arledge would give him a raise. Now, that's the old school way of doing journalism, where you're supposed to be a watchdog of the government. That was great. We don't have that anymore. Now, the second story is related to how they do things now. I was talking to a reporter for a major publication, off the record, at one point, and he told me, look, if I don't have my sources inside the government and I don't have that access, I'm going to get fired. And I got a kid who's about to have a bar mitzvah. I can't get fired. So now the new line of thinking is, if you don't suck up to the sources inside the government, you're not only not going to get a raise, you're going to be out. That has produced the crappy journalism that we have now, which is obsessed with access as opposed to what they used to be obsessed with, serving the people, the audience.
Richard, We have social media networks like Twitter, like Facebook. Have they filled in some of that gap? Have they taken the place of what traditional newspapers and news organizations used to do?
Well, they're certainly able to provide the information faster and quicker and get it out there to more people. But the fact is, are the people really using that information, really looking at that information? For example, reporters who write stories in print newspapers are told put out a Twitter promoting your story. You have to pump it up a little bit. You have to so that hopefully by pumping it up a little bit, you get more people to read it. So that the idea is sell your story rather than tell your story. It's a little bit different. Telling your story may not be as sexy as selling your story, and so therefore maybe the stuff that you put into that story or the emphasis that you put into that story is not really the story.
Right, Cenk, is that what's happened here? You know, we put more emphasis on public relations right now, you know, on flying the flag, making sure the brand is not hurt, rather than any substance to actual reporting.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's an issue, especially for the larger networks that are obsessed with their so-called brand. I think their brand is all the same anyway, vanilla. So I don't know how you hurt vanilla. But I think the phenomenon that's happening online is a little different. It's not that somebody's doing a better selling of their product on Twitter or Facebook. It's that there is a new brand of journalists that are out there that are not attached to the larger media organizations, that are willing to actually do real journalism. So it's new school meets old school. So the Glenn Greenwalds of the world, and then also much smaller folks out there that are in their own ways challenging what the establishment media is saying, what the establishment is saying in the government. And they're ferocious in a good way, where they say, no, we're not going to put up with any of the BS of the government. We're going to tell you how they're spying on you. We're going to tell you all the things they don't want us to tell you. So I think that's the most positive development.
Right, Richard, that's a good point. You know, you've got people like Glenn Greenwald that Cenk just mentioned, Jeremy Scahill at Intercept. You've got people at Vice News. You've got people at Vox doing some great work. But do they have traction among the public?
Well, that's the thing. Who are they? Is there an echo chamber, or are they getting out there to the general public? I don't sense that they're getting out there to the general public. They're getting out there to other social media as well, who will then promote that particular idea. But it seems as though the people that are attracted to that are of the same ideological ilk or the same persuasion so they want that information, and they probably know it already. And they're not. It's not getting to the general public. I just don't think it's good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff, but I don't think the general public is getting to it.
Cenk?
Yeah, I gotta really disagree with that, and it's based on my experience. So, for example, at the Young Turks, we've reached over 2 billion people so far in the span of our network, and we reach over 2 million people every single day on just the flagship show, The Young Turks, let alone the entire TYT network. And Vice does similar numbers. Vox is smaller, but they're doing good journalism. The Intercept is smaller, but they're doing great journalism. And so what I think the misconception is who you're talking about when you say general population. For people under the age of 35, the group that I just mentioned that dominates online, including us, is overwhelming. We reach them better than anything on television could dream of reaching them. Here, let me give you 2 examples. Right now, the average age of the CNN audience is 63 years old. Average age of the Fox News audience is 68 years old. Average age of Bill O'Reilly's audience is 72 years old. Who the hell is he reaching? He's reaching a senior citizen center. Who cares about Bill O'Reilly? Who cares about Fox News? 78% of the Young Turks audience is under the age of 35. 78%, okay? So if people in Washington who are above the age of 35, who are these power players, haven't watched Vice or Vox or Young Turks or whatever it might be that's online, well, that's a sad day for them. We have captured the youth. And so everybody under the age of 35 watches us, not those guys. So today, we might not be in as much power as we want to be because the power players are above the age of 35. But soon, you will find out exactly who's been watching us.
So, Richard, is it all a question of demographics here? And the other point is that, is there also a lack of, when we see great reporting like that produced by Glenn Greenwald and Fox News, etc., there's less accountability coming from government. They don't really feel that they have to be accountable to these news organizations.
Right, they don't. The thing is that that information is getting out there. Whether it's having impact is still, we don't really have good measurements. Polling that we do indicates that, most people say they're getting their news from television or the internet now. It used to be television, now it's television and the internet. People are getting their news from that. How well informed are they? What do they want to know? The thing that goes on with the mainstream media, and I've noticed happening, especially in this particular administration, where you have the Obama administration, they push back on the mainstream media pretty heavily. If you're a reporter assigned to cover the White House and the Obama White House, and you're writing regularly about or reporting regularly about what's going on in the Obama White House, if they don't like a story that you write, they'll push back, not only upon you, the reporter himself, but also push back on your editors and push back on some of your executives. They will call and complain, and they will argue about things. And the implied threat is you'll be cut off if you don't toe the line. And so there's a lot of that kind of reporting that comes out of from the mainstream media, out of this White House, because they think they can go over your head. They can use the social media, and if you want stories, you have to be able to talk to people within the administration, other than the press secretary, and reporters are not finding that those doors are very open.
Right, that was a point that Cenk made, actually, that you will be cut off from your sources if you do report truthfully on what is happening. Cenk, you may be cut off, but news organizations themselves don't stand behind their reporters, do they, when they receive those kinds of threats? If you look at what happened at the New York Times, there's a reporter right now who's under threat of being imprisoned if he doesn't divulge his sources.
Yeah, look, mainstream media, I'm telling you, is in a world of trouble here, because they keep backing the government instead of their reporters, and they've forgotten what they're supposed to do. But look, the larger problem for them is, I can put it in language they'll understand, is profitability. If you forget that you're supposed to serve the audience and not the powerful, you will soon be out of business, which is exactly where they're headed. They're so used to now, over the last 12 years at least, 14 years, kowtowing to whatever the powerful say, the government says. Yes, sir, absolutely, sir. I'll threaten to fire that reporter, sir. It sounds like the tapes that got leaked in Turkey, where the Prime Minister bullies the press, and the press says, yes, sir, of course, sir, I'll fire those guys right away, sir. We're slightly more subtle here in America, but you keep doing that, and you're not going to have any audience anyway. So they're dooming themselves to irrelevance. Think about it this way, one more way of putting it. If you're catering to insiders, so for example, CNN just hired Jay Carney. Who in America thinks, I can't wait to hear what Jay Carney has to say? Nobody thinks that, because everybody knows what Jay Carney's going to say. The government is right, the Democratic Party is right, Obama's right. He'll tweak them every once in a while and say they might lose an election or two. But he's going to say the official government position, okay? And CNN thinks, yay, we got a big catch, we got another insider. No, you're missing the point. That's your whole problem. The guy watching in Wichita, Kansas is not an insider. He's an outsider, and he wants you to be with him, not with the powerful. They're doomed.
Richard, in this day and age, could we see a Watergate or a Pentagon Papers happening?
Yeah, I could see it happening, but the thing is, will they stick to it? It takes stick-to-itiveness to keep. That story was started out with the two reporters who just were dogged about the issue, and finally it started to produce some traction. And other media started to pick up with it. In the beginning, nobody was paying attention. You need stick-to-itiveness. You need people who are willing to commit for the long run, and that's the problem. We've got several stories out there that nobody really has come around and said, we're going to put all our resources into this story. There's the IRS, there's the Benghazi story. There's no real investigative reporting going into that. I'm going to get to the bottom of this story. I'm going to get to the bottom of that story. Those stories just fall apart after a while because the the people looking for ratings and looking for demographics say, ah, there's nobody who's interested in that, go on to something else.
Cenk, you know, as you pointed out, there's two very different audiences that look at the mass media right now. There's that young audience, which gets most of its news online, gets its news from organizations like yours, and then there's the older ones that gets its news from traditional organizations. But we've seen, you know, on the older side, why has there been so little opposition to what has been going on with this massive consolidation of the media, with the fact that, you know, regulatory bodies are looking the other way when one corporation goes for the media and takes over another one?
Well, it's the powerful in New York and D.C. have decided that they're going to work together, so none of this should be surprising. You know, we have the revolving door in government. The FCC is the perfect example. Tom Wheeler used to be the chief lobbyist for the industry. He then turns around, goes inside the government, and says, oh, yes, the industry is now allowed to control the internet, to make even more money, and to drive out their competition. Well, who's surprised that their former chief lobbyist made that decision? Nobody should be surprised by that. And that's because Obama, who got elected by taking an enormous amount of money from very rich and powerful people, does what he's told to do by his donors, who are his boss. They say, okay, now you put the chief lobbyist in, and he says, yes, sir, absolutely, sir, I'll put the chief lobbyist in. The biggest joke that was ever played on the American people was those placards in 2008 that the Obama campaign had that said change on them. There's no change coming. It's just the same old thing with a different face. And so, look, you know, we don't talk about Watergate. We already had Watergate during the Bush administration. Warrantless wiretapping is clearly illegal at the time, clearly unconstitutional. And what happened? They just turned it into a he said, she said. The mainstream media, with their cult of neutrality, said, well, some people say it's warrantless wiretapping. The other people, by the way, agree it is warrantless wiretapping, but they say it's perfectly okay anyway. Well, okay, then we'll call it even and just, you know, say that there's no issue here. Look, Nixon might have gotten thrown out of office for that. If they did the break-in now, you think Nixon wouldn't have gotten away with it? If we had the current state of media, he absolutely, positively would have gotten away with it. Instead of a break-in, he would have called it an extraordinary entrance. And they would have said, he said, she said, and he would have been totally fine.
Cenk Uygur, Richard Benedetto, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to both of you for joining us.